I think that's a good moment to hand over from my questions to the floor. If you want to ask a question to the floor, please wait for a microphone to get to you. We have some of our members watching on a live link, and they need to hear it through the audio. Do you have some questions for Bill from the floor? I think we'll start with the person right here. Please say your name and college for the record.
My name is Dmitry. I'm from Hughes Hall College. Quick question for you. What do you think about Alexei Navalny? And what do you think is his position in the government? Thank you.
Well, so Alexei Navalny, I know Alexei Navalny from my days in Russia. So when I was doing these naming and shaming campaigns against companies, he was just starting to do the same thing. And when I left, the only person left to expose corporate malfeasance was Alexei Navalny. He then took that and parlayed that from a business perspective into a political perspective and started looking for corruption and government malpractice. And over the number of years, Alexei Navalny has become more and more famous and more successful at exposing government corruption. And he made a very great movie about Yuri Chaika, the general prosecutor of Russia, showing all the criminal activities that Yuri Chaika's son was participating in. He made a really even better movie about Dmitry Medvedev, the former prime minister of Russia, showing that Dmitry Medvedev had $2 billion worth of property. Those two guys are now fired from Putin's government. He just made a movie yesterday, which I haven't seen yet, which is about the new prime minister and his relationship with a tax official who stole a lot of money. And so Alexei is really shaking things up in Russia and making a lot of people very unhappy. He's been unable to have a legitimate political platform because they've invalidated him from running for any office. I think if there was an election today, a fair election, he would be elected president of Russia.
More questions from the floor. The woman there in the third row, right? Yes, you with your hand up. Yes, there's one coming to you just now. If you're going to stick your hand up, please really go for it so somebody can stop you.
Thank you for interesting introduction. And my name is Luba. I'm Russian, and like Magnitsky story influenced my career quite a lot. At the moment of the beginning of this story, I was working for an international law firm based in Moscow, and I remember the shock in the law society, which was caused by this terrible death. But then after half a year, I left this American law firm and joined Russian institution, and I saw a bit of different effect in Russia of the whole Magnitsky Act, which this act had in the Russian investment society. On the one hand, it's a great success as a promoting human rights and defending the human rights worldwide. But internally in Russia, it has an opposite effect. And I believe that it's also empowered these bad guys against which you try to act by promoting this act. So what I'm trying to say, don't you think that, it has an opposite effect internally in Russia, and all international investors left, all NGOs activities was quite limited in Russia, and internally we have an opposite effect. Our market became more closed and invisible for international organizations. So, and this act has an opposite effect in our country.
Well, that's interesting. One of the people I was fighting with back in the days when I was fighting with the oligarchs was Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He had the sharpest elbows of all the oligarchs, and he was one of my biggest adversaries. And he was sent to jail. But it's interesting because, and he went to jail for 9 years and 8 months, and then Putin very graciously and generously let him out of jail 4 months before the end of his term, instead of sending him to jail for life. And when he got out, I kind of, I felt sorry for him. And I felt like he was really, even if he had been an adversary during the time of when we were businessmen, he was really a victim of Vladimir Putin, and we reconciled. I became his friend. And one of the things he told me when he was in jail was that when the Magnitsky Act was passed, the conditions and the way that they were treated by the guards dramatically improved in the Russian prisons. And that's exactly what it was meant for. And you can, I mean, if you take, your logic look how bad the guys are in Russia in response to the Magnitsky Act. Shouldn't you have not done it? I mean, so should you just like leave them to kill and steal and do everything with no punishment? I just can't imagine that there's any logic that would support that. Yes, a lot of evil regimes try to drum up public outrage. I mean, who could possibly be upset if a Russian crook gets his assets frozen? How does it affect anybody else? It doesn't. I mean, we're not sanctioning the Russian people's assets. The Russian people are victims just like Sergei Magnitsky. The Russian crooks are the ones who are in trouble. And I have a lot of friends in the Russian opposition who wouldn't agree with that statement. They would say that this is, and in fact, Boris Nemtsov was one of them before he was killed, who said that the Magnitsky Act is the most pro-Russian piece of legislation out there. Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is his protege, who is still alive even after 2 assassination attempts, goes to parliaments around the world saying the same thing. And so, yes, evil regimes will try to use propaganda to stir up the pot, and they do in not just in Russia, but creating consequences for people who do terrible things has to be better than no consequences. There's no logic that I can see that makes it better to do nothing.
The gentleman with the blue T-shirt, and we might start taking a pair of questions at once, so also the lady in the second row after that.
Hi, my name is Nauman. I'm at Wolfson College. So when the European Parliament voted for the Magnitsky Act, you call it the will of the people. But then when Hungary opposes it, you call it a Trojan horse. And the fact that it took an American senator to sort of bully a small European country.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
When the European Parliament votes for the Magnitsky Act, you call it the will of the people. But then when Orban vetoes it, despite the fact he has a supermajority in the Hungarian Parliament, you simply call him, write him off as a Trojan horse.
Yep.
And the fact that there are multiple other countries, like in Italy, where the 3 biggest parties are all opposed to any more economic actions towards Russia. So, and countries like Kosovo, they're more guided by their policy towards Serbia rather than actually about human rights, especially when they have themselves people accused of war crimes and ethnic cleansing. So isn't there sort of an opportunistic element here that a lot of these people that are supporting the Magnitsky Act, especially John McCain, they're simply using this as a vehicle for wider foreign policy, not actually about human rights itself?
Well, so the European Parliament, you know, the way that European parliamentarians are elected is through a democratic process. And they've made a view. The Hungarian Parliament didn't have a vote to say, we unanimously reject it. What we know is that Viktor Orban has been actively supporting Putin in a number of different things, including inviting a new Russian financial institution that has total immunity from any legal oversight into Hungary, and many other things like that. I think it's a matter of fact, and Viktor Orban has said it, that he supports Vladimir Putin. And so is he acting, is he acting in the Hungarian national interest when he does that? Or does he have some other motivation for why he's doing that? I think there's a lot of people that would believe that he's doing it for his own personal interests, not for his national interest. In terms of the Magnitsky Act, so when I go around and I go to different lawmaking bodies around the world, this is not a partisan issue. The only groups that, so the question is very simple. In whatever country, in country X that I go to, should this country allow torturers and murderers to come to this country and use the financial system, or should they not? And so it's not a partisan issue. It's not a right-wing, left-wing, medium-wing thing. There's no logic there's no pro-torture and murder lobby out there to say that you should allow torturers and murderers to come in. It just doesn't exist. And therefore, when we did it in Canada, we had a unanimous vote of the Canadian Parliament, a unanimous vote in the European Parliament, a unanimous vote in the Lithuanian Parliament. The only people who are against it and it's just starting to emerge, are these extreme right and extreme left-wing groups. And they're doing it because they're getting support from people like Vladimir Putin. And so, I mean, what I've seen, and I'm sure that not everybody has got absolutely pure intentions, but what I've seen is that most politicians have had to make horrible sacrifices to be politicians, but they all went to become politicians for the right reasons originally, and it's to do the right thing. And this is one of the few right things that all politicians can do, which is why we end up with these unbelievable unanimous votes. And so I don't think that it's being done for the wrong reasons. And the Magnitsky Act, while it upsets Russia very badly because it's named after Magnitsky, doesn't just apply to Russia. It applies to bad people everywhere. It applies to the generals in Myanmar who were going after the Rohingya. It applies to the security services in Nicaragua that were killing demonstrators. It applies to Dan Gertler, who is an Israeli businessman who stole from a number of African countries the natural resources. It's just good versus evil, black and white. I see the least cynicism of any political interest in this versus everything else out there.
Great. This time we will succeed in having two questions in the same round. So the lady there in the second row, and then the lady towards the back. Lara, if you can grab it off there.
Is this on? Oh.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your amazing speech. My name is Mathilde. I'm from Lucy Cavendish College. And my question is, as an American, what do you think about your own country's history of human rights abuse? And is that something that you like to tackle in the future?
Thank you for that. So
we'll just hear the second question, and then you can take them.
Yeah.
Hi, Jessica from Mariota's College. This is quite unrelated, but you've spoken before about the dangers of investing in Russia as a foreigner, that you'll be killed or arrested. And a lot of that came up last year with the arrest of Michael Calvi.
Yeah.
And I worked on that case on my year abroad, and there was a lot of talk about whether it was going to scare all foreign investors off. And it doesn't seem to have had an immediate massive effect on foreign direct investment. But I was just wondering what you think the effects of the Calvi case, of someone who was so high profile and regarded as doing things so carefully in Russia, being arrested there, would have on foreign direct investment in the future.
So two quite specific questions there.
So to answer the first question, although I have all mannerisms of an American, the accent and my attitude, I actually am British, and only British. I became British 21 years ago. I emigrated here 30 years ago, and I gave up my American citizenship. And so I view certain things going on in America as being deeply troubling right now, as do many Americans. The policy at the border of separating babies from their mothers is probably one of the most horrible things I've ever seen, and I think this is a very dark moment in the history of America, and hopefully there will be some justice for those situations as well. On the Mike Calvi question, so just to give everybody who doesn't know the story, on February 14th last year, the largest private equity fund manager in Russia, a guy named Mike Calvi, who ran a firm called Barings Vostok, along with, I believe, 5 of his partners in the fund, were all arrested and charged with fraud for something that looks remarkably unfraud-like to any outside observer. They got caught in a business dispute, and the people on the other side of the business dispute were better connected than they were and had them arrested. And the really sad part for Mike and his partners is that Mike was one of the biggest promoters of Russia. And back in the day when I was arrested, he was saying, Mike said, I'm different than Bill Browder. I don't challenge the regime. We know how to operate. We were friends with the regime. We never said anything bad about them. And he thought that was going to get him safety and security. And the fact is that once the authorities had gone through and stripped out and terrorized and expropriated all the sort of enemies of the regime, they still needed money. And so they had to go out and start to terrorize and expropriate the friends of the regime, and that's where Mike got caught up. I don't think there's any scenario that one can go to Russia and expect to make and keep your money over a long period of time. And I say that definitively. It is such a criminalized country that sooner or later they're going to come for you. And that's not a very pleasant thing. And as a result of that, Russia has almost no small and medium-sized business in the country, because small and medium-sized business comes from starting and taking risks to start a business. And if you start and take risks to start a business, and then all of a sudden somebody, once it gets successful, they're going to steal it from you, why would you do that? And so if you look at China versus Russia, China, like 2/3 of their economy is small and medium-sized businesses. In Russia, it's like 10%. And the foreign direct investment figures are de minimis in Russia, and a lot of it is not real foreign direct investment, but investment from Russians through Cyprus and other offshore jurisdictions. Unless a company absolutely has to invest in Russia, and if you do, if you're an oil company, there's no oil in good countries. You have to go to bad countries, and Russia is probably less bad than some other countries. But if you're a bank, you don't have to be in Russia. And most banks who started out there have ended up leaving because it's just too criminalized, too dangerous, and too much downside. And so I think the Mike Calvi story is extremely cautionary. In fact, just one final thing on this. At Davos last week, I was at a session where the former Minister of Economics, who now has just been promoted to, I think, Putin's special economic advisor, was there as the one representative of the Russian government. And he gave a glowing presentation about how wonderful it was to invest in Russia and how good a country was and how the economics are all so great. And I got up and I asked the question. I said, okay, Magnitsky, told him in 1 minute, my question was, I told the Magnitsky story, and then I told the Mike Calvi story. And the other person on the panel was Kirill Dmitriev from the Russian Direct Investment Fund. And he said, oh, it's not so bad, in fact, I'm a friend of Mike Calvi's, and I've been saying that he shouldn't be arrested. And I said, but he's still arrested. He's in jail. And he said, yeah, but he's only under house arrest now. It's just an uninvestable country.
I think we'll take maybe 2 more questions. Is there somebody in the gallery, because I can't see very well lights-wise? No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, that gentleman over there, and if there isn't anybody else, the lady on Mike Calvi again, but there does look like there's somebody there. So. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kovi, I'm from Downing College. So Putin is currently preparing for the end of his constitutionally allowed period of presidency. Do you see an opportunity in that period of transition for some sort of revival of democracy in Russia? Or do you think that his power is already too absolute, and that any hope that, the demonstrations that were seen for democracy over the last year or 2 in Russia could actually make a difference in this period of uncertainty for Putin?
Great, and could you pass it to the gentleman there with another question?
So my question really is that there are a lot of countries that sort of depend on the opacity of, well, shady crooks, as you mentioned, right? There we see a lot of tax havens who base their entire economy on getting these massive amounts of investment from abroad. So what is your strategy to try to get them on board with what you stand for?
Okay. Two quite different questions. Will Putin accept this constitutional constraint this time?
So Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world. He got his money by graft, theft, extortion, and killing. His money is not in his own name. The money is held in the name of trustees, oligarch trustees, because if it was in his own name and any documents showed that, he could be blackmailed with those documents. Therefore, if he's ever not in power, the people who he's trusted with his money probably won't hand it over. And therefore, his money only exists to the extent that he's in power. And so if he's ever to lose power, he would lose his money. He would probably go to jail because he's done so many terrible things, and in jail, God knows what could happen to him. So he's got a pretty strong incentive not to ever lose power. And so 2024 is when he's constitutionally limited from power. But he controls all the devices to change the Constitution. And strangely, Putin has this, and it's not just Putin, it's a Russian cultural thing. They like to pretend like they're living in a civilized European country with a rule of law. And so they like to do everything by the book, by the legal book. I mean, even during Stalin's times, they didn't just shoot everybody. They had them sign confessions, and then they shot them, because that was the law. And so Putin is just going to change the rules. He's going to go from president. They're going to create a new body. I think it's the State Council. They'll put all the powers of the presidency in the State Council. He'll become head of the State Council, and he'll stay in power until his last breath. Coming to your question, is there any possibility of something happening in the meantime? It's a very interesting question, and I think it's very relevant that he has made this decision. So Putin is an extremely risk-averse guy. The fact that he's decided 4 years before his power is up to do something dramatic like this, and this is dramatic what he's done, firing his whole government, he never does that, firing Medvedev, firing Chaika, firing all these people, that's really dramatic, very out of character, and it shows that he's scared of something. And so something was cooking underneath the surface. I don't know what it is. I don't think anyone really knows, which is probably along the lines of what you were just thinking about or saying. It's something, he was scared of something. Whatever he was scared of, is that gone away with this shakeup? Maybe, maybe not. Anything is possible. It's a very brittle system. It's very hard to stay in power into perpetuity in any country, and particularly a country which claims it has democracy, because the people in Russia think that they're living in a democracy, even if they sort of are cynical and pessimistic and know there's cheating going on. It's not a kingdom. Putin is not the king. He's supposed to be democratically elected, and so he's scared of something. What that is, we'll see. And then the second question is about tax havens and all the people benefiting from all this dirty money. Is that right? And that's also a really important question, because none of this would be possible. They don't keep their money in Russia. They keep their money in the West. And none of this would be possible if the Westerners weren't enabling them to do it. And there's a lot of Westerners making a lot of money off of enabling them. And we discovered that a whole bunch of Scandinavian banks were involved in this, and particularly a bank in Denmark called Danske Bank. Danske Bank. Denmark is considered to be either the first or second most honest country in the world, based on the Transparency International Index of Honesty. And Danske Bank was found out last year to have been responsible for laundering $230 billion of money from Russia and the former Soviet Union. I think it's a really big problem, and I think it's hardly been a problem to have been solved. So nobody's gone to jail for many of these things. I don't think there's ever been a prosecution putting people in jail for doing this kind of stuff. And until people go to jail, Western bankers and lawyers are going to continue doing this stuff because it's profitable. And there has to be a greater risk than there is a reward for them to carry on with this stuff, and it's one of the things that we are working on.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. I'd like everybody to give Bill a massive round of applause in a second, because we're going to walk out now. And if you could please stay in your seats. And thank you so much, Bill, for your talk, and thank you for fighting for justice for Sergei Magnitsky.
Thank you.